My name is Lena Carter. I'm 30 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew exactly who I was building my future with. I was never the kind of woman who rushed into love because something felt exciting. I paid attention. I watched how people handled stress, disappointment, silence, embarrassment. Anyone can be charming when life is easy. I always believed the real version of a person shows up in the moments that don't photograph well. That was why, when I said yes to Ethan, I meant it with my whole heart. I truly believed I had done everything right. His name was Ethan Hayes. We had been together for almost 2 years, engaged for 6 months, and from the outside, we looked like one of those steady couples people quietly envied. We weren't dramatic. We didn't perform our relationship for attention. We weren't constantly breaking up and getting back together. People use the same word for us over and over. Stable. I used to love that word. Now, I think stability can be one of the most dangerous disguises in the world. Sometimes what people call stable is just silence, just routine, just two people staying inside a structure long enough for everyone else to assume the foundation must be solid. Looking back, the signs were there. They just never arrived wearing the name they deserved. They came in small moments, a shift in tone, a reaction too sharp for the situation. Ethan had a way of turning inconvenience into injury whenever it benefited him. If plans changed, somehow he became the neglected one. If I corrected a detail, I was invalidating him. If I asked for clarity, he acted like I was starting a war. But he was good at making every moment feel too small to matter on its own. And I was good at explaining things away. He's stressed. He didn't mean it like that. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe this is what compromise looks like. That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. It rarely begins with one giant moment. Usually it starts with 100 tiny rehearsals. And by the time the real performance begins, you've already trained yourself not to trust your own discomfort. The night everything changed didn't begin with screaming. It began with something stupid. I don't even think the original disagreement matters now. It was one of those ordinary couple arguments about plans, timing, priorities, who promised what and when. The kind of thing that should have ended in irritation, not destruction. At first, it sounded normal. Then Ethan's voice changed. Not louder, sharper, cleaner. Like he had stopped reacting and started choosing. "You always do this," he said. I frowned at him across the kitchen. "Do what?" "Act like everything revolves around you." I remember blinking because the accusation didn't even fit what we were talking about. That was the first moment my stomach tightened. "That's not what this is about," I said, keeping my voice level. "Yes, it is," he replied too quickly. That was when I noticed the shift. He wasn't trying to resolve the argument anymore. He was building something. I could feel it before I understood it. The conversation had stopped being messy and emotional. It had become deliberate. "You know what?" he said. "I'm done arguing about this." "Then don't." He stared at me for a second. Not angry, not hurt, calculating. Then he said, "Maybe I should call someone and let them deal with you." I gave a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I thought he was trying to scare me into apologizing. "What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. He just reached for his phone. Something in my chest went cold. At first, I still thought it was a bluff. People say reckless things in relationships. They threaten silence, space, breakups, consequences. But there was something about the way Ethan held the phone that made my skin prickle. He wasn't performing rage. He was already inside his next move. "Ethan," I said, sharper now, "stop." He tapped the screen. Didn't look at me. Didn't hesitate. Then I heard him say, calm as glass, "Hello? Yes, I need to report something." For a second, my brain refused to catch up. There's a strange space between hearing words and understanding that they're real. I think I lived inside that space for several seconds, maybe longer. Long enough to stare at him and still hope this was some grotesque attempt at leverage. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned slightly away from me, as if I were the interruption. "I'm not safe," he said into the phone. That sentence changed the room. The air felt thinner after that, colder, like the meaning of reality had been rewritten in front of me, and I was the only one who hadn't been warned. I took one step back. He kept talking in a controlled voice, shaping a version of the night I barely recognized. No panic, no confusion, no heat. Just certainty. By the time he ended the call, his face had changed too. The irritation was gone. So was the emotional chaos of the argument. What remained was worse. Confidence. "You shouldn't have pushed me," he said. I stared at him. I didn't do anything. He gave me a small smile that did not belong on the face of someone making a frightened report. "Good luck explaining that." That was the moment I understood enough. Enough to know this wasn't impulsive. Not a wild overreaction he would regret in 10 minutes. There was no fear in him, no trembling, no second thoughts. Only the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won. Standing there in the kitchen we shared, with my pulse pounding in my ears, I realized the most dangerous thing about the man I loved was not that he could lie. It was that he could lie calmly. The knock at the door came faster than I expected. It wasn't loud or forceful, just controlled, official. And somehow that made it worse. Ethan didn't move right away. He glanced at me first, like he wanted to see something land. Fear, panic, pleading. I gave him nothing. Then he opened the door. 2 officers stood outside, calm, professional, already leaning toward belief. Because that's how these things work. The first story told is the one that shapes everything after. "Good evening," one of them said. "We received a call." Ethan stepped slightly aside, gesturing toward me without looking directly at me. "She's inside." Not my fiancé, not Lena, not even her. Just a direction, a problem to be handled. I stayed where I was, didn't raise my voice, didn't rush forward, didn't try to explain over him. Something inside me had already made that decision. This would not be solved in that room. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside," the second officer said. I nodded once. Because resistance in moments like this gets rewritten, and I could already feel the story forming around me. As I walked past Ethan, I caught his expression out of the corner of my eye. Satisfied. Not relieved. Satisfied. That was when the last piece of denial inside me broke. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. One of the officers guided me a few steps away from the door while the other stayed behind, speaking quietly with Ethan. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I already knew how this looked. A calm man, a composed voice, a clear accusation. And me, standing outside my own home like I didn't belong there anymore. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" the officer asked. "There was an argument," I said. "Did it become physical?" "No." He studied my face with that trained neutrality that isn't neutral at all. Because he wasn't just listening, he was comparing. My version, Ethan's version. And one of them had already been delivered first, with certainty. "I didn't do anything," I said, quieter this time. He gave a small nod, like he had heard that sentence before in 100 different forms. Because he had. And that was the problem. Truth doesn't sound unique. But a well-built lie often does. The second officer stepped back outside and gave his partner a subtle look. No words, just enough to confirm alignment. Then he turned to me. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." There it was. Not a question, not a request, a decision. I didn't argue, didn't ask why, because I already understood something most people don't realize until it's too late. At that stage, explanation doesn't matter. Only procedure does. I turned once, looking back toward the doorway. Ethan was standing there, watching. Then, as I stepped toward the patrol car, he leaned forward just enough for his voice to reach only me. Low, quiet, almost conversational. "Have fun in jail, loser." For a second, the world narrowed into a single point. Not anger, not even hurt. Clarity, because that sentence erased every remaining possibility that this was a misunderstanding. This was intentional, deliberate, chosen. The officer reached for my wrist. The click of the handcuffs was softer than I expected. But the weight of them wasn't. Cold metal settled against my skin with a finality that left no space for interpretation. I didn't resist, didn't pull away, didn't look back again. I kept my eyes forward as they guided me into the car. The door shut, and just like that, the life I thought I was living ended without ceremony. The ride to the station felt both short and endless. Streetlights blurred past the window. No one spoke. The officers weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were efficient, detached. To them, this was routine. To me, it was everything. At the station, everything moved quickly. Doors opened and closed. Voices overlapped in the background. Paperwork moved from one desk to another. Names were asked. Answers were recorded. It all felt mechanical, like I had stepped into a system that didn't care who I had been before I entered it. I stood where they told me to stand, sat when they told me to sit, answered what I was asked, nothing more. Somewhere between the front door of my house and the fluorescent lights of that station, I had stopped trying to fix what had already been set in motion. One of the officers finally looked at me and said, "You get one phone call." That sentence landed with a strange precision. One. I nodded slowly. And for the first time since Ethan picked up his phone, I reached for mine. Not to explain. Not to defend myself. Not to panic call a friend or a lawyer. I already knew exactly who I was going to call. My father. The contact was still at the top of my recent list. I pressed it and held the phone to my ear. He answered on the second ring. Lena? His voice was calm, steady, the same way it had always been. But something about hearing it in that moment made my throat tighten in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. Dad, I said. Just that. Nothing else. There was a pause. Short, sharp. Enough for him to hear everything I wasn't saying. Where are you? He asked. At the station. Another pause, longer this time, not confusion. Calculation. I'm coming, he said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. And for the first time that night, I let myself exhale. Because Ethan had made one critical mistake. He thought I was alone inside the version of reality he created. He thought once the story was spoken, it would hold. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the one call he forced me to make was to the man who understood exactly how stories like his fall apart. The holding area was quieter than I expected. Not silent, but disconnected. Distant footsteps, a ringing phone somewhere down the hall, low voices passing through walls that didn't quite block anything. I sat on a hard bench, my wrists still faintly marked where the cuffs had been. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't trying to understand what had happened. Because I already did. What mattered now was what came next. The officer at the desk glanced at me once, then again a few minutes later. Not hostile, just routine. To him, I was another situation moving through a system that rarely stopped to question itself unless something forced it to. And right then, nothing had. Not yet. I leaned back against the wall. The fluorescent light above me hummed softly. Time stretched. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I didn't check the clock. I didn't need to. I felt the shift before I saw it. The door at the end of the hallway opened. Footsteps followed. Measured. Even. Deliberate. The officer at the desk straightened slightly before he even looked up. That was the first sign. Then my father walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't need to be. Authority doesn't always announce itself with symbols. Sometimes it walks in quietly and lets the room recognize it on its own. The background noise softened without anyone being told to stop. Attention shifted toward him on instinct. He didn't rush, didn't scan the room like he was searching. He already knew exactly where he was going. His eyes found me almost immediately. For a second, nothing was said. He just looked at me, not shocked, not confused. Assessing. I straightened slightly without meaning to. Then he turned and faced the officer at the desk. Would you mind explaining, he said, voice calm and precise, why my daughter is being held here? The word daughter landed heavily. The officer stood up at once. Sir, I'm not asking for a summary, my father said. I'm asking what evidence justified detaining her. Silence. Not awkward. Just still. Because the situation had shifted and everyone felt it. The officer glanced at the file on the desk. We received a report. I'm aware of that, my father cut in. What was verified? Another pause. Longer this time. Because now the question wasn't procedural. It was structural. And the answer wasn't there. I watched the officer's expression change. Not panic, not fear. Just the quiet realization that what had felt routine minutes ago no longer held the same weight. My father nodded once, as if he had just confirmed something he already suspected. Bring me the report. A file appeared in his hands. He didn't skim it. He read every line. The room stayed quiet while he did. When he finally closed it, the sound echoed louder than it should have. This is insufficient, he said. Not opinion. Conclusion. The officer didn't argue, because there was nothing to stand on. Remove the restraints. Movement followed immediately. The same officer who had placed the cuffs on me stepped forward again, keys already in hand. He didn't speak as he unlocked them. The metal loosened and fell away. I stood slowly. My father turned back to me. You all right? Yes, I said. That was enough. Then he shifted his attention back to the room. Where is the complainant? That word changed everything again. Not Ethan, not your fiancé, not him. Complainant. A role, a claim, something now open to scrutiny. She's still at the residence, one of the officers replied. My father nodded once. Good. Let's go speak with him. And just like that, the momentum of the night reversed. I walked beside him toward the exit, the same hallway now feeling different beneath my feet. Not because it had changed, but because the story controlling it had. Outside, the air hit my lungs sharper than before. The patrol car was still there, the same one that had brought me in. Only now I was opening the front door myself. My father paused before getting in. Lena, he said quietly. I looked at him. If there's anything I need to know before we get there, tell me now. There it was. The only question that mattered. I held his gaze. There isn't. No hesitation, no qualifiers. Just truth. He studied me for a second, then nodded. All right. He got into the driver's seat. As the engine started, I leaned back and watched the station disappear behind us. Ethan thought he had already won. He thought the system would carry his version forward without question. He thought confidence was enough to make something real. But confidence only works until it meets scrutiny. And scrutiny was on its way back to him. The drive back felt shorter than it should have. No radio, no small talk, just the quiet hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of tires against the road. My father didn't rush, but there was something in the way he drove that made it clear this wasn't just a follow-up. This was a correction. I sat beside him, watching the streets pass by, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not relief. Not yet. Something colder, harder. The house looked the same when we pulled up. Lights still on, doors still open, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. A second unit arrived behind us. Doors opened. Quiet coordination. No chaos. Just presence. We stepped out. My father didn't look at me as we walked toward the entrance. He didn't need to. He already knew what this was. Ethan was exactly where I had last seen him, standing near the doorway, waiting. For a split second, when his eyes landed on me, there was something there. Not guilt, not regret, confusion. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Then he saw my father, and confusion sharpened into recognition. Then calculation. I already explained everything, Ethan said quickly, stepping forward just enough to take control of the space again. Repeat it. My father's voice cut through him without force. Just precision. Ethan paused. Only for a second, but it was enough. Because people telling the truth don't need to reset. They continue. He adjusted his posture and started again. The same story, the same tone, controlled, measured. He spoke about the argument, about feeling threatened, about things escalating. He used the same structure, the same phrasing, the same careful pacing he had used on the phone. It would have sounded convincing if I hadn't already heard it once, if I hadn't lived the version he was rewriting. I didn't interrupt, I just watched him. For the first time since this started, I saw it clearly. Not just the lie, the effort behind it. Every word placed where it needed to be. Every pause calculated. Every detail shaped to feel real enough to pass without challenge. He wasn't improvising. He was performing. My father let him finish. Then he asked one question. Can you prove any of that? It landed heavier than anything Ethan had said because it didn't attack the story. It removed its foundation. Ethan blinked once. I already explained, you stated, my father corrected. I asked if you can prove it. The difference was surgical. Statement versus evidence. Narrative versus fact. Ethan's jaw tightened. For the first time, his composure slipped. I mean, it happened. I told you what happened. My father held his gaze. That's not what I asked. Silence. Not hesitation, absence. Because there was nothing there. No evidence, no mark, no witness, no inconsistency in my behavior to support his claim. Just words. And words without anything behind them collapse fast. Ethan's eyes flicked toward me, looking for a reaction. Fear, panic, anything he could use to stabilize what was slipping. I gave him nothing, and that was when it started to fall apart. Not dramatically, not all at once, but visibly. His shoulders shifted, his breathing changed. The confidence that had carried him through the call, through the officers, through my arrest, cracked. I didn't think I needed to, he started. You do, my father said, but here's the problem. He stepped forward slightly, enough to take full ownership of the space. You made a report that resulted in detainment. That requires more than a statement. It requires verification. Ethan said nothing, because he couldn't. And right now, my father continued, there is none. The officers behind us stayed still, but I could feel their attention change. The alignment had shifted. The quiet signals that had worked in Ethan's favor earlier were now moving the other way. He felt it too. That was the worst part for him. Not being confronted. Realizing the system he tried to use wasn't holding him anymore. I was just trying to protect myself, he said finally, weaker now. My father didn't react. From what? No answer. Because the answer didn't exist. The silence stretched, and in it, everything became obvious. Not just that he couldn't prove it, but that he had never expected to be asked to. That was the real mistake, not the lie itself. The assumption that it would never be tested. My father nodded once, slow and deliberate, then turned slightly toward the officers. That will be all. It wasn't loud, but it ended everything. No escalation, no argument, no scene. Just over. Ethan stood there, still trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through his hands. But there was nothing left to grab. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest loosening enough to breathe again. My father turned to me. Let's go. I didn't look at Ethan again as I stepped past him. Because whatever we had been ended the moment he decided a lie was worth more than me. The house felt different the moment we stepped back inside. Not broken, not damaged. Just emptied. My father spoke briefly with the officers outside, making sure everything was documented the way it should have been from the beginning. Then he came back in, expression unchanged. "You staying here tonight?" he asked. I looked around. At the kitchen. At the hallway. At the place where I had stood while Ethan rewrote reality like it belonged to him. "No," I said. It wasn't hesitation. It was recognition. He nodded. "All right, pack what you need." That was it. No speech, no emotional cushioning. When the truth becomes that clear, you don't need comfort. You need movement. I walked past Ethan without acknowledging him. The confidence was gone now. What replaced it wasn't guilt. It was disorientation. "Lena," he said. I didn't stop. I went straight to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. For a second, I just stood there, in the space that had held two versions of my life. Before and after. Then I opened the closet. The same closet where my dresses hung beside his jackets, where our lives had been arranged into something that looked permanent. I reached for a bag and started packing. Not everything, just what mattered. Because something inside me already knew I wasn't coming back. Halfway through, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Same face, same person, but something behind my eyes had changed. Not broken, sharper. Like whatever illusion I had been living inside had finally shattered, and what was left was more honest. There was a knock at the door. Soft, careful. "Lena, can we talk?" "Ethan." "Of course." I zipped the bag before answering. "There's nothing to talk about." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "You're acting like I opened the door just enough. "You called the police on me," I said. No emotion, no raised tone. "Just fact." He swallowed. "I thought—" "No," I cut in. "You didn't think, you decided." That landed. I saw it, because it was the first thing said all night that he couldn't reshape. "I felt threatened," he insisted, weaker now. "By what?" "Silence. The same silence from before, the same absence. Only now there were no officers, no audience, no structure to hide inside. Just us, and the truth between us." "You don't even believe that," I said quietly. His eyes shifted. That was answer enough. I stepped back slightly and opened the door a little wider. "Move!" He hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked past him, bag in hand. My father was waiting near the front door, ready. I didn't look back as we stepped outside. Not because I was trying to be strong. Because there was nothing behind me worth seeing. The next few days weren't dramatic. No screaming matches, no late-night confrontations. Just silence. I stayed at my father's house, not as a child coming back, but as someone recalibrating. The calls started the next morning. First from Ethan, then from numbers I didn't recognize. Then from people who had only heard fragments. "Are you okay? What happened? Is it true?" I didn't answer most of them, because explaining something like that always turns into a negotiation of perception. And I wasn't interested in negotiating reality anymore. Ethan left voicemails. At first defensive. I didn't mean for it to go that far. "You're overreacting. We just need to talk this through." Then softer. "I messed up. Please don't do this. Lena, just call me." Then desperate. "I didn't think they'd actually arrest you. I thought it would just scare you. Please, I need to fix this." That was the message that stayed with me. Not because it hurt. Because it clarified everything. He didn't regret what he did. He regretted the outcome. There's a difference. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I blocked his number after that. Not out of anger. Out of precision. Because closure doesn't come from hearing more. It comes from deciding you've heard enough. Friends reached out. Some supportive. Some confused. Some carefully neutral, like they didn't want to choose the wrong version of the story. I didn't correct them. Because the truth has a way of settling on its own when it isn't constantly being adjusted. The engagement ring sat on my dresser for 3 days. I didn't touch it. Didn't move it. On the 4th day, I picked it up, turned it once between my fingers, and placed it inside a small box. Closed it. Not symbolic. Not dramatic. Finished. Because whatever that ring represented no longer existed. A week later, I went back to the house. Not alone. Not to stay. Just to collect the rest of what I had left behind. He wasn't there. At least not when I arrived, which made everything easier. I moved through each room without rushing. Taking what was mine. Leaving what wasn't. As I stood in the doorway one last time, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't even feel relief. I felt done, and that was stronger than anything else, because it meant there was nothing left for him to take. 2 months later, everything looked normal. That was the strange part. Not dramatic, not chaotic, not the kind of aftermath people expect when something explodes, just quiet. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. Before, it had been comfortable, predictable, easy to misread. Now, it was earned. The case never went anywhere, because there was nowhere for it to go. There was no evidence. no follow-up, no contradiction in my behavior that supported what he claimed. Once that became clear, the system did what it was supposed to do. It corrected itself, slowly, without apology, without ceremony. Just forward. I didn't have to fight it. I didn't have to prove anything. The truth didn't need reinforcement. It just needed space. As for Ethan, I didn't hear from him again. Not directly, but stories travel, even when you don't go looking for them. I heard he tried to explain it at first, tried to reshape the narrative again, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a moment taken too far, something that got out of control. But that version didn't hold. Because once a story collapses publicly, it doesn't rebuild the same way. People remember the cracks. They remember the silence when proof was asked for and nothing came. And they remember who stayed calm when everything fell apart. That matters more than people think. I moved into my own place a few weeks later. Nothing big, nothing impressive, just mine. And for the first time in a long time, I paid attention to something I hadn't realized I had been missing. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. Real peace. The kind that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to maintain it. The kind that doesn't ask you to explain your own reality to someone who keeps rewriting it. The kind that actually feels stable. And this time I understood what that word meant. Not silence, not convenience, not the absence of visible problems. Honesty. That's what stability is. And anything built without it is only waiting to collapse. Sometimes I still think about that night. Not the argument, not even the arrest. That moment in the kitchen when he picked up his phone. That was the real turning point. Not when the police arrived. Not when the handcuffs clicked. Not when my father walked into that station. The second he decided a lie was more valuable than the truth. That decision didn't just end our relationship. It revealed it. People think betrayal is loud, obvious, easy to identify. But it isn't. It's quiet, calculated. And sometimes it wears the face of someone you trusted completely. That's what makes it dangerous. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's simple. When someone believes they can destroy you with a lie, they are not preparing for scrutiny. And they are never prepared for the moment the truth stands still long enough to be seen clearly. Because when that happens, everything changes. Not loudly, not all at once, but permanently. And the truth? It doesn't need to win loudly. It just needs to outlast the lie.